Today on Monday Morning Express, we're going to have the opportunity to visit once again with Bob Darwin in the second part of seeing what goes on behind the scenes with research and design to create these brass model projects.
Also on today's show, we're going to have part one of installing interiors into your passenger cars, an important way to add realism and, of course, value to any of that older brass that you may have.
We'll also get the chance to meet with Scott Inman and learn how to put sound and DCC into a brass steam locomotive if you so desire. Welcome to Monday Morning Express. Roland, last season we were able to visit the Soundtracks facility.
Good time.
It was really impressive. We even learned a lot about the Tsunami 2 decoder and how much power really is in that and how it can help with your operations.
Right.
However, what that probably left a lot of our viewers wondering is how would I go about getting that installed into my brass locomotive?
Yeah, sounds like a perfect how-to segment.
Yeah, like we need sound. Sounding off with Scott?
Sounds good to me.
Scott Inman. So
All
we're
right.
joined
Welcome,
by
Scott.
Scott Inman. Thanks so
right.
much for joining us.
Here.
My pleasure.
Good to have you
Glad
here.
to be here.
Now, Scott, tell us a little bit about your history. When did you start working with trying to install sound?
Well, I've been doing this almost 20 years. I started back in the early 2000s with Soundtracks products, so they're very familiar to me. Our Model Railroad Club in Sacramento, California converted to DCC right around 2000, 2001. So we started with these early products, such as the Soundtracks DSX.
That's a collector's item now, I think.
Yeah. This came out of my stash.
Wow, very nice.
So yeah, and back in the day, you used to buy the type of sound decoder you wanted by the air horn.
Right.
So now
Okay.
we've come a long way.
Yeah, they were a
Sure,
lot
sound
more
decoders.
limited.
Absolutely.
So how many installs would you say that you, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Hundreds, I
Hundreds.
assume, right?
Yeah, and you know, I started out like everybody else did with the Athearn Blue Box installs just to get
Yeah.
my feet wet, and then you move up gradually. And so now, you know, I'm comfortable with the most high-end brass and the steam articulated engines. So you start out, and then it's building blocks.
Very
And
nice.
you pick it up as you go.
Scott, I noticed you have some nice models here, and people might look at the large Challenger 484 and say, oh yeah, I could see putting that, but then you get Vandy tenders, sausage tenders.
Yes.
Those get a little more scary, so appreciate you getting a nice variety to show us and work
Absolutely.
with.
So you know what we're going to do is, as part of a series, this how-to series with Scott, we might say, we're going to go through and break this down. You're going to go through and show us how to do a typical install. But in this particular segment, just go ahead and give us a brief overview of what we have here on our table and what we can expect to learn.
Absolutely. Well, I'll start with the models. So we'll break down in later episodes. We'll look at small steam, medium-sized steam, and larger steam. And if you get a familiarity with steam, it's very simple to go to the diesel because you don't have to worry about the pickup on each side of each part of the model. So we'll kind of jump right in with steam. And there's some tools, though, that we should cover as part of this introduction to sound installation. And it's very important to talk a little bit about a soldering station. Any soldering station with a regular fine point tip like this.
So not resistance soldering for this?
No,
right?
resistance soldering is not necessary for putting in a sound decoder.
Okay.
Much more simple process than that. And then, of course, your basics like a solder tip cleaner like this. And then usually any solder that's kind of a fine grade will work. And
It's pretty thin.
that's a rosin core, which is nice because if you want to solder direct wire to wire, you don't have to flux both sides. You just can go direct. And then there's some tapes. Double stick tape is good because you don't want to ruin the value of your model with a lot of glues. Sometimes electrical tape can be good in tough situations. Then we have two wire here for speakers if we need to tack on extra wire. And then, of course, something that's very critical is a nice, clean cradle.
Yeah.
I like these foam cradles. They're about $15.
Sure.
And then you can put your parts up here in this ridge as well. So we can show the folks that.
Okay.
And then a couple, just everybody in their toolbox will have things like these screwdrivers and the needle nose pliers if you need those, or cutters. And then, of course, very important is tweezers. I like 2 different styles, one straight and one with an elbow. And then as far as choosing your decoder, that's very important in this process because that's the most expensive part of this per engine. So if you're going to work with a smaller steam locomotive, Soundtrax has a Tsunami 2. It's the model TSU 1100, and it's the version that's the smaller size. Little bit different capacity as far as amp output and upkeep, but it still will work in this application just fine. And then this is the current standard, the Tsunami 2, the 2200 version, which is great for most diesel applications, larger steam.
Okay.
And then everybody always wants to know about the speakers because that's huge. So Soundtrax has actually come out with what they're calling a Sugar Cube speaker. And this speaker is really revolutionary because it has a good sound, it has a nice range of depth to the sound, and this is perfect because now with this size speaker and quality, you can put the whole sound decoder up in the locomotive rather than going with parts in the tender. Because Dan, as you mentioned, in these sausage tenders or the Vanderbilts, sometimes it's impossible to get in there without unsoldering. And that today is kind of going away, the need for that with the smaller stuff. And then you've got sky's the limit. There's some very high bass products out there that are much larger. There's some speakers with enclosures that are made that are also minis. And then a company called Railmaster, they put out sometimes a combo kit where you can buy a speaker and the baffle box, and you just wire in the speaker wire, and you're ready to go. A couple of other things might be a little tough to see, but these are connectors, and you can get these on eBay. They make 2 wire, 3 wire, 4, and then there's a 6. And so depending on where you're going to put your decoder, how many lights, for example, in a Southern Pacific steam engine, you might have a special light function like a Mars light on the front of the engine. That's going to require another function wire. So on the same subject of lights, bulbs, very important. Company called Miniatronics makes very nice bulbs.
And you're still using incandescent over
Personally,
LED?
I am, because when I started doing this back in the early 2000s, LEDs weren't really the quality they are today.
Sure.
So my fleet of brass has pretty much been standardized on incandescent bulbs.
Okay.
And going
And you
back,
have a pretty simple trick for us on how not to burn those out, right?
yes, I do. And so since you mentioned that,
Speaking of.
so resistors, quarter watt usually works great for anything we're going to do in this scale. And we won't get into Ohm's law or anything like that in this series, but if you always use a value resistor greater than what your Ohm's law calculation would be for the bulb that you're going to use, then usually that brings down the value of the output enough to where the longevity of that bulb will be much greater.
Maximizing it.
Yeah, you're going to maximize the life. And in my case, and in the normal model railroader's case or brass collector, we're not going to be running these every day in a museum setting. So usually, in my experience, I've been just fine with incandescent.
Very nice. And of course, your controller that you're going to show us here a little bit later, and we'll go ahead and see about getting some installed.
Yeah,
well,
that
thanks.
sounds great.
It's going to be a great
appreciate it.
series. I see you got your new MME mug all
sure
shiny
do.
and ready. We'll fill that up. And this is going to be so simple. You only need coffee or water, nothing harder, right, to deal with.
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes the heavier stuff might make it seem faster or less complicated.
We might have lost somebody. We might have lost somebody at Ohm's law, but that's not that
Right.
complicated
No,
either.
no.
So I know you and Roland are going to do a great job, not only sharing how to install, but I like how there's not that many tools involved,
Right.
and we really want to show people that they can do it.
Absolutely.
What percentage of your collection of photographs of railroad-related items are shots you took, or did you also accumulate other photographers' collections?
Over the years, I've purchased several collections of photographers that have passed away, or photographs. You know, in the olden days, these guys like Robert Forster, he would, if he shot a locomotive, a good shot, he would take 6 negatives. And then he'd go home, he'd develop those, and then trade them off to other photographers that he knew for some of their best shots.
Okay.
And that's how these shots got around.
Right.
And they were very particular about the credits, you know. They always had their name on them, which is good.
Sure. And to this day, that's very important.
Yeah, here. Will Whitaker, very, very famous guy. I bought his entire collection of SP shots back. This is back in before he passed away, about 18 years ago. And this is one of the Santa Fe negatives of his. He just did beautiful, beautiful work. Look at this.
Oh yeah, the Blue Goose.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, very nice. Boy, that must have been something to see in person.
Well, each one of his negatives was beautifully exposed.
Yeah, and a great composition, getting the right angles, lighting, and that's where it's not just the quality of the negative, but a great photographer knew the right shot to take too.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the famous photographs of the famous locomotives. He had to have it, you know.
So going through, first of all, you have access to this, which is wonderful, but it takes time, a little bit. You've, like everything, organized it to the point that goes quick. But if you don't have enough photos, or you don't have those drawings, with all these projects you worked on, then how would you handle it to make sure that data was complete?
Then I go out into the field and try to find what I don't have. That's what I had to do with the Cheyenne book. That was such a complex project that, you know, luckily I had access to different museums around the country that I knew had collections of Cheyenne material. I knew photographers that had shot there. One of the biggest helps I had was Jim Ehrenberger in Cheyenne, who he worked for the railroad for years and years and years, and he was a prolific photographer. All big negative stuff like this. And through him, I collected a lot more stuff that I couldn't have gotten in any other way.
Sure.
And Jim, you know, was one of the best photographers of UP stuff, going back to before before the diesels were introduced. Did a lot of stuff in the 30s and 40s. So so you find someone like that and you go through his collection. If you can't find it there, he might suggest somebody else. Dick Kindig, I met Dick Kindig, who was probably the greatest UP photographer back 20 years ago before he passed away, and went through his collection, and that way you find more stuff that you haven't had before. But you have to do this research to do it properly. It just doesn't happen overnight. You know, the Cheyenne book took 3.5 years of collecting.
And that was with flying. You were fortunate to have your own plane at the time?
Exactly. Yeah, I had my own airplane, and I could fly where I wanted to. Supposing you didn't, if I didn't have that, I couldn't have done it. Seriously.
Right.
You know?
So not only were you fortunate enough to have the access to these individuals that could get you the information, you had the wherewithal to get there.
Right.
So I think one of the things we can help our viewers understand in the research process, it is truly a labor of love. Like, I don't think the importers could really pay somebody necessarily what it's worth to do all that. You have to have a love and want to see the models produced, and then we all benefit.
My basic motivation is if I want a copy of that model.
Right.
See? And if I don't, I'm probably not interested. Or
right.
If I'm not interested, I'll at least give them whatever information that I have. But I won't research it.
Sure.
But if I really want that model built, I will do the research for the importer.
And that's what gets it off the ground.
Everything that he has to produce that model properly. That's the only way to do it.
Sure. And in some cases, you're fortunate enough to, if the prototype was still in existence, you'd go take the photos you needed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how long would you say that period of time from the first phone call until you have a good, solid data package to send the importer could take.
9 months to a year.
Sure, to do it right.
At least, yeah.
So there is a very time
And
intensive.
that's just a regular project like a locomotive.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we were discussing earlier some of the interesting things Overland did, even structures and so forth. That was because you had access to a lot of those drawings and blueprints that they wanted to see.
And which reminds me of another thing. When Tom Overland wanted to do the E2s, you know, for the city trains, they had been done before by Oriental or somebody.
Possibly, sure.
The nose was completely wrong. And I said, Tom, you know, Oriental did these, and they're terrible. He said, I know, but he says, how can we get hold of the original drawings? He tried. I don't know what his sources were, but he couldn't get them. And through my connection with UP and Ed Bailey, I made a contact at the manufacturer, and I said, you know, I'm trying to recreate this locomotive. Can you allow me to see your drawings of the E2? And I said, I'll be happy to fly there and blah, blah, blah. You know. And they said, yes, we'll be happy to do that. So I got there. I forget the guy's name. They took me right to the drawing department, you know. And you know how big these drawings are?
Yeah, you were showing us some, and they can be huge, right?
But we're talking about, for a diesel locomotive, they're full size
Wow.
in some cases. You know?
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, I just want to see the nose. Just show me the nose. And out he pulls these. I said, that's what I need. You know?
Oh, that's
I need
amazing.
that drawing.
Did that give you a little adrenaline rush when you, it's like finding...
Incredible.
Yeah.
I actually laid my eyes on this thing. And as I suspected, the bottom of the nose in front, it does not come down flat. It comes down and it curves inward on the bottom, just about 2 degrees.
Right.
But enough to make a difference so that you can see that. And the Oriental model, it was nothing. It was absolutely terribly wrong. So I called Tom. I said, I've seen the drawings. I'm going to get a copy of them. Oh, Bob, thank you, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, it took me about a week for them to make a copy. And we had to downsize the copy because I didn't need it full size, obviously.
Right.
But they did the whole thing for me. It didn't even charge me a penny for it. And then when I got the drawings here, I had copies made of that. And that's what I sent to Tom. And that's how we produced those E2s.
And every owner is thankful.
Every owner has to be thankful because that's the only time that nose was ever done properly.
I think sometimes as collectors, we just are a little oblivious to that work and how accurate and how hard it is to get that information sometimes.
We had the same problem. I say we, Al Ickelson and I, when he was doing the E7s, this is back in the mid-'80s, I think, and Oriental, Al Challenger bought Oriental.
Right, that's his start.
And Oriental had produced the E7s earlier, but again, the nose was totally wrong. The nose actually should be flat right under the windshield and just go down about 1 or 2 degrees. I forget exactly what the measurement was. But the Oriental models were like a 10-degree slope. I mean, it was totally wrong, totally wrong. So I said, Al, I hope you're not going to use the same, patterns. He said, well, what's wrong with them? I said, well, I'll tell you what's wrong with them. They're wrong, Oh, well, show me what they're supposed to be like, I liked working with Al. He was a funny nut, but I talked him into producing a whole new nose for this. And I can show you the original pattern that we used, that he had produced in Korea for that nose. And it was correct.
Yeah, and he was always willing to go to bat for you if you've seen something you didn't like, right?
Absolutely. Which some of the dealers didn't do.
Right. So did the importers normally, so you got on the data package, that took 9 months to a year, then of course they had to do their thing with the builders. Would you get to see the GODs and so forth?
Oh, absolutely.
And then you would look those over for
I'd go over the GODs, I'd make all my corrections, send them back, and then have those shipped back to Korea. And then when those came back from Korea, I'd see the corrections.
Right. And did you get a chance to look at the pilot models in many cases?
Yes.
Good.
Always.
So that research And design phase might have taken a year,
Yeah.
but then it continued through the
Right.
phase of that model being produced.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And then ultimately, hopefully, you ended up with a model that you were happy to see in
That
your
you're
display
happy-
case
exactly.
and operate on your layout.
Well, like when we were making movies, if you put your name on something, you want it to be right.
Right.
And if I saw my name up on the silver screen, produced by so and so, I want to make sure that people are going to say, "Wow, that was a good picture."
Right.
Not what was that piece of crap,
Well, you took that approach with the Cheyenne book. You've taken that approach with the
Absolutely.
research.
If it's not right, don't do it. And Al agreed with me.
Yeah.
And although he balked at the cost sometimes, and the cost sometimes was a lot more, he still realized that I was right. If you're going to do it right, or don't do it at all.
And those models, and it must make you feel good to see how they stand the test of time. They're increasing in value.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because not only do people have confidence they're accurate, but they'll likely never get produced again.
Never, I'm sure. Not in our lifetimes anyway.
Right.
If ever.
And I think it's fascinating on this season of Monday Morning Express. We're talking a little bit with about the early Japanese, their culture, their building prowess. But really, without individuals like yourself in this hobby, we wouldn't have a quality product. There's a few driving forces, and sometimes they've been behind the scenes to make sure we get a proper model.
That's absolutely true.
Bob, previously we were talking about the research and design, and we looked through the photographs and the amount of time. But now I know this project here you're helping the Coachyard with right now, right?
Yes, the M10,000.
Oh, right here, yep, the M10,004.
There it is.
So we see the drawings, we see you got photos, how you go about it, but how do you ensure the colors are correct?
Well, usually on these drawings, it says what the colors are. And here it says red stripe, okay? And here it says Harbor Mist Gray.
Okay.
And then here it says Armor Yellow. So what we do is we go back to our original color chips for those colors. And look what we have. This is the original color chip from DuPont. It's got to be authentic. Harbor Mist Gray.
There it is.
And here's the same thing for Armor Yellow, right from DuPont.
Look at that. So you went many years ago and got these from DuPont.
I got those from DuPont. And to make it all accurate, we have to have the red stripe. So there's the red stripe between Armor Yellow and Harbor Mist Gray. And those are the three primary colors for the Union Pacific for the past 50 years.
So that's what you want the model to look like.
And that's what you want the model to look like. So then we send these original chips to Korea along with the package to make certain that the builder knows exactly what the colors should be like.
Right.
And if he gets them right, you have an accurate model. If they don't, it will not be accurate. It's that simple.
Yes. And at the end of the day, you get this back
I
from
get these
Korea
back,
because
yes.
you are the keeper of
Yes.
these particular items.
Exactly.
Very good. So it's just another piece that goes into making sure we have an accurate model with accurate colors.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
So Gideon, this is a police car. What is a train? What sound does a train make?
Choo choo.
Oh,
You like trains?
Yeah.
Hey, can you say you're watching Monday Morning Express?
Yeah.
Say you're watching
Watching.
Monday Morning Express. Say Monday Morning Express.
One spread.
All right, good job.
boy, now we're going to take a look at interiors. It's something
Correct,
that, some cars come and they're just so plain, but by adding interiors, we can really add that special element to our passenger cars.
That's finishing them up, bringing life to. For many years, a lot of cars were brought in without interiors, and there's a lot of them out there still in the market.
Right.
But to put in that interior really makes a difference. And for some of these guys that are running trains, they actually upgrade or they will change out their. Some cars come in with interiors already, but they're very heavy.
Right.
And to get runners, they will get their interiors custom made out of plastic.
Okay.
So that way it lightens up. sometimes an interior can weigh quite a bit, and so they can get an extra car added to their consist if they go the different route. So,
and I know that there's some things that we got to make sure to take in consideration, because we want to make sure that they're level. We want to make sure that they're in the right position as far as windows are concerned. Make sure that we have the right type of seats within the car.
Plenty of furniture out there, and we have companies like Palace Car Company, from seats to passenger car, coach seats, dining room tables, dining booths, dome interiors, lounges, the kitchen interiors. There's all kinds of stuff now available these days. To keep these guys in business. That's why I really want to show off this. Yeah. That way more people jump into this bandwagon and go back to modeling.
Okay, so we have our sleeper car here, right?
Yeah,
let's go ahead and, here's our test dummy, so to speak. So let's show us how we're going to go ahead and add in, or go about adding in some seats.
Yeah. So we start off with our interiors. We have to know what goes in there.
Right.
And our reference books. A lot of this stuff it may be online too. What was the interior of that passenger car? And we know that this one is a sleeper. And right here, there was an aisleway along this side. And so we usually have a room divider. So when you look at the car, there's no way you're really going to look through unless some of the doors were left open. But, and right here, this is a dome, coach. There's, the big windows with the lower coach sections and then the upper dome. What do we do with something with this big void in here? I mean, so let's start filling it up. And, one of the things is we need platforms for this. We need a platform to put our chairs. We need a platform to put all of our interiors. And the way I do it with the set of calipers, I take my measurements. And now the measurements, I take the calipers and open up and just capture from side to side, like right there. And then just take it in a little bit, because don't go all the way with you. Yeah, you got to give yourself some room to put the interior in. And plus, this interior wall, there's an interior bottom right here. That bottom is similar to this angled plastic. The angled plastic is welded in. This part is soldered in, leaving this bottom part so that way the bottom of the car can attach to. So,
and isn't the other thing, for example, in this particular car, you got that skirting that's bent a little bit. So if you have that exact, you're going to have a tough time getting it out.
It's very hard. And then you got to think about your shades and your window material in there. That's already used up space. So you need a little bit of wiggle room. So with the calipers, you can get pretty precise and then just back off maybe, an 1/8 of an inch from your measurements. So when you get your measurements, just tighten down the sides. And you can get a piece of plastic and just scribe right on down. Just what I'm doing is with this part is kind of scribing the plastic as I go down while the other one's writing the edge. So that way when I put it through a paper cutter,
you've already got it there, right?
I already know where my line's at. So I'll put that there. Now this one is just a little bit too long. Let me cut it just a little short. Because the car's not that long. And so now I'm going to end up with a strip. So in strip, in theory, is going to be right down here on the floor, on the bottom of the floor. It's going to fill up the bottom.
Nice.
But it's going to be on the inside. On the bottom of each car, there's screw holes along this channel. That's where the screws go in. So those screw holes will represent where these screw holes are going. These guys, where the screw holes and this bolster. So all these things have to be taken consider, because when we put this plastic in there, we don't want our screws to hit this plastic. So we lay our car down in there, our plastic down in there, and I'll get a magic marker and just start hitting my screw holes.
And then will you cut out around those?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I've done on the bottom part of this plastic, I've made little markings. So that's where the holes are going to be, and I'm going to mark this. I'm just going to put a B for bottom, or just put B-O-T-T. Bottom. I just labeled it bottom.
Okay.
So I will get a hole puncher and just start punching out the little sections where the screws go. You have your safety glasses on?
Yes, I do.
Alrighty.
Oh, that one got me in the chest. And again, that's a thicker styrene, isn't it?
Yeah, this is going to be pretty thick to hold all the seats. You have the, you know, the interior weighs quite a bit. And, oops, there's one hole that I missed. So these divots right here will represent the holes on the bottom where the bottom screws in. So what we're doing is when we put our screws in for the floor, the reason I do this is so that way the screws don't hit the bottom of the plastic and start lifting up the interior. We have to get around all the... So when I get that, now I can start determining what, you know, what seats I'm going to put in there.
Right.
So...
And do you have to cut out for...
Yes, that'll be cut out too, yeah. And so what I'm going to start doing now is marking the windows, where the windows are at. So down here, as I look down, as I hold it, just the center of the window. That's what it is the center of the window. So right here, now I have all the center of the windows, and that's where I could start putting my seats. Yeah.
It was really great to see what Boyd taught us as far as installing these interiors in these passenger cars. But you know, there's another level that he's going to take us to in part 2 next week in our show.
Yeah, I think some of our viewers, I know I was surprised how far he really takes that level of detail. And coming up in 2 weeks, we'll see a different side of Boyd, because he was our field reporter out in Branson.
Yeah.
So we talked about that a little bit in our opening
it's going to be a lot of fun.
And I'm looking forward to that.
Very good. Also, we didn't have project updates today, but we did have one we wanted to make sure to tell our audience, and that's a new announcement from Union Terminal Imports. They're making the Southern Pacific E7 project, both A and B units. 7 versions of those. You could see it on our website at brasstrains.com. There's also one special version that's the experimental Halloween scheme. So pretty cool looking
surprise announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and those are coming up in the near future.
Very near future, because they're going to be made with the other E units, the ICE units, coming up by the end of this year, I'm told. So we've only got 6 weeks to be able to reserve those. That's what they're telling us.
Oh, that's great.
So we look forward to that. Well, folks, thanks for sharing. That's going to do it for this episode of MME. Now here's what's in store for next week's show.
Next week on Monday Morning Express, Scott Inman discusses prepping the decoder for a DCC and sound install in a brass steam locomotive. We look forward to the return of How To with Hal in the introduction to painting a steam locomotive. We are sure you'll pick up some great pointers from this tutorial. We will return to our interview with Kenichi Matsumoto and Fred Hill discussing the very early days of brass model building and how the Japanese culture gives honor to the craftsman. Finally, discussing the 20th year in business, Dan and Roland reminisce about some of the highlights and also how it seems everyone young and old has a love for trains.